Welcome to Talking Roadmaps, the channel where we talk about all things roadmaps, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Today, I'm joined by Maarten. Maarten, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. Hi, I'm Maarten Dalmijn. I'm the author of a book on sprint goals, driving value with sprint goals. And yeah, I work as a product management / agile consultant, dabbling a bit in the world of agile and product management. Prior to that, I worked at startups, scale-ups, corporates in product management roles. And 1 year ago, I decided to take the leap to help companies all over the world. So that's let's keep it short, but that's what it is.
Sounds good. And yeah, I know that journey as a former product leader who's also a now turned product coach. It's an interesting journey, and I do love the leverage we get in terms of helping organizations personally.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's very different. It's an adjustment, but it's also very, very interesting. But yeah, it's a nice position to be in. Yes.
And if I remember rightly, you're crossing the Netherlands.
Yes, correct. I'm in the Netherlands. Yeah. So I was born in Amsterdam and I live in Hilversum, which is like 20 minutes from Amsterdam.
If you're enjoying the channel, subscribe, hit the bell, and give us a like. What's the purpose of a roadmap?
So the purpose of a roadmap, I think it should answer a few questions like, so where do we want to, so what are we trying to achieve and what do we intend to do to achieve that? And I think it's really important to separate the two, because very often what you see is that roadmaps really focus on what we want to do instead of what we're trying to achieve. And yeah, there's a difference between the two.
Okay, so unpack that a little bit more for me. What do you mean by what do we want to achieve?
So basically, delivering a feature doesn't mean you're delivering value, right? It's about like does the feature make possible? So it's really about how are we creating value and how are we capturing the value? And that's basically the outcomes we're looking for. And of course, features can make those things possible. They can deliver value, right? They can create value and you can help with capturing the value. But it's not like that if we deliver a feature that it's guaranteed. And that's where kind of in the roadmap, you need to separate the two, because otherwise, yeah, you have a feature factory and then you deliver the feature and you believe that delivering a feature makes it certain that you're delivering value. And that's why I think a roadmap should help with that, like separating, decoupling those two things.
So who are we communicating this to? Who's the audience that's looking at this thing of what we're trying to achieve, the value that we're creating and capturing?
So I think it also really depends in the sense that, let's say you've got a public roadmap. Some companies do, right? I think if you were to make the public roadmap the same as your internal roadmap, all that uncertainty regarding like, what are we trying to achieve? They don't care about that. They just want to know, hey, what's coming in Q1? You know what I mean? What will... So I think putting that aside, right? I think the roadmap is for the people in the company, especially if you're working in a product company, there has to be common understanding. Like if you're working for a SaaS product, I don't think it's just for the C-level. It's also for the teams that are doing the work. So they know, what are we focusing on? What do we believe matters? Yeah. And at enterprise companies, for example, very often it becomes a coordination instrument. You know what I mean? Because coordination is the problem. So then they list features. So that's why it's very difficult to answer who is the roadmap for, because I think it serves different purposes. And very often, for example, the C-level I'm talking about, but the C-level, they want this sense of certainty, this confidence that the teams know what they're doing. So yeah, there is a purpose, right? But different people expect different things. And as a product manager, you need to manage those expectations and not like, hey, a roadmap that looks glorious and perfect on paper, I call it a paper victory, maybe won't set us up for success.
Yeah, I mean, one of the previous guests, I think even called it consensual kind of realities. Like we're all buying into this future view of the world. We know it's probably not really going to happen. And yeah, I mean, it's something that is casting a view out into the future, but you're right, there are different audiences. I think I'm on 5 different audiences, which probably all need different views of my roadmap at this point, which becomes a bit of a pain now. But you went there, you said as a product manager. So you said, so is the product manager the person that owns the roadmap?
I think owning a roadmap is a difficult question to answer, right? Because let's be honest, if you're working at a product company, the roadmap is crucial for the whole company. I mean, sales, marketing, the CEO, everybody cares about the roadmap. Because if you work on the wrong things, it will impact the whole company. And that's where I believe it's the job of the maybe not the product manager, but like one of the lead product managers or the head of product or chief product officer, depending, like to make sure that to facilitate the right conversations. You need the input from sales, from marketing. It needs to be something that is not just the product management department throwing what they believe over the fence. Like you said, like there needs to be this shared understanding across the company. And that's the conversations you have to facilitate. And that's what makes it so incredibly difficult. But everybody has to share the same understanding. And you can only have a great roadmap if you include all these different perspectives, because building a product is very holistic. It's not like just marketing, just sales, you know what I mean? They all influence the product.
Couldn't agree more. I give a talk called Your Roadmap Sucks. And one of the kind of problems I identify around roadmaps is it's treated as one person's artifact, when in reality it's the team's artifact. It's a team alignment, communication. This is the direction we're going. It might be the product manager that does the admin work and puts it into it. But yeah, we've got to kind of, and I guess that maybe brings an interesting opportunity to bring sprint goals into there. How would a sprint goal align with what's going on the roadmap and those different audiences?
So here's where it gets interesting, right? So if you think about it, you kind of have like different phases. Like you have discovery, you've got delivery, and you've got validation. And it's not like that there are waterfall phases. One happens before the other. Like it could be that you go from validation back to discovery. But the main thing I'm trying to say is, when you use sprint goals, you're in the sprint, you're trying to deliver something, right? So what's really important is that you understand, hey, this is the outcome we're trying to achieve, and this is the output we're producing during the sprint that we believe help achieve that outcome. Because outputs drive outcomes, you need both, they're linked. So the moment you talk about sprint goals, you're really getting more into the delivery level, because what I don't believe is, so you have all these people saying like, yeah, you have to do discovery during the sprint. But let's be honest, most sprints are 2 weeks. So discovery means planning enough customer interviews, you know what I mean? Like that's not going to happen. And then coding it, and then it's not going to happen in 2 weeks. I don't believe that. Like sometimes just getting the right customer interview already takes 2 weeks, you know? So yeah. So where does sprint goal fit in? Really in the delivery part. And why is that crucial? It's because delivery is uncertain. Our estimates are wrong. We discover surprises. So sprint goals help keep that scope flexible, because we're saying, hey, this is the goal we're committing to, this we're trying to achieve during the sprint. There may be other things we're working on during the sprint as well, but this is the one most important thing where we believe we can make the most impact. And yeah, I compare it to the commander's intent. Like you have mission, this is going to be a military comparison. So I'm not trying to glorify war, but every mission is accompanied with a commander's intent. What are we trying to achieve? Why does it matter? And that means that the people on the battlefield, the people that do the work, or in our case, the Scrum team, they're free to adjust plans as necessary to meet the goal, which is great, because that means the product owner or product manager, they don't have to answer every question, make every decision. Yeah, so that's it in a nutshell.
If discovery is not happening within the sprint, but we want to involve the same people in discovery, how do we align those things?
Yeah. So maybe I just want to make sure I'm not causing a, misunderstanding. But it's happening probably a sprint before, you know what I mean? It is in a sprint. In the end, you need to plan it, and you need to involve the right people. And as you know, like with product trios, it needs to be people from the team. So yes, you should plan it, but there isn't this forced sprint boundary that everything has to happen in one sprint. That's the main thing.
Got it. Yeah. And so then I'm absolutely aligned. It's like essentially you're doing the prep work a little bit earlier to then be able to focus on the delivery. In fact, sometimes I reformat the now, next, and later roadmap into deliver, discover, and I call it explore, which is kind of the strategic context of finding the problems, for example. Because one of the things I realized a long time ago when I looked at the now, next, and later was later meant I'm trying to understand the problems. Next means I'm trying to understand the solutions, which might include a spike in my sprint. And now means, okay, I'm focusing on getting this done so I can get it out the door.
Exactly. That's exactly how I like to work as well.
Now, this all goes into a context, and I guess the same thing's true with the sprint goal. There's vision, there's strategy, there's objectives. They're all kind of informing these things and making them kind of link together. How do they link together in your view?
The way I see it, a vision is something that doesn't exist yet, right? That's kind of like what you're trying to make possible with your product in the world. It's a dream, kind of, you know, like it's something which is not yet there. It's like the future state you're trying to achieve. I'm trying to think of a good example, right? But maybe like the iPod, right? Like 1,000 songs in your pocket. Like before the iPod, that's already like one sentence, kind of a vision, what you're trying to achieve. Like 1,000 songs in the pocket. They didn't have that. Nobody had that then. The strategy basically is about what are we trying to focus on? Like where are we playing to win? And a good comparison I always make, a friend of mine was a poker player and he was a really good poker player, but he played against football players because they had a lot of money and they were not that good at poker. and that was his strategy, basically.
I love that idea of a strategy.
Yeah. And they have big egos. So when they lose, they hate losing. So they want to win, so it's the perfect. So he was actually playing against famous Dutch football players. I'm not going to mention names. And he was making a killing. And this is strategy. So how are they linked together, right? So you need a vision, you need a strategy because they inform your roadmap, because your roadmap is kind of like a set of choices you're making as a result of that vision and that strategy. You cannot do everything, and they're like relevant contexts that guides the creation of your roadmap. And basically, the better your vision and your strategy, the easier it's to say no. That's the way you should see it. If you have a weak vision or a weak strategy, that means anybody who comes to you with an idea, it will be yes. That's the moment you have a weak vision or strategy. The moment you have a strong one, a good example is the Palm Pilot. Like when they created the Palm Pilot, they made it a prototype. I think it's called a prototype. So, but like a wooden block, because the guy who made it, I forgot his name, unfortunately. He was involved in making it. He had made a previous product which was too big, and nobody used it. Right, so he was like, it has to fit in your shirt pocket, and he always carried it around because everybody. Like, okay, so we're going to make the sound better. Will it still fit in the shirt pocket? Yeah. So if it can empower you to say no to things, then it's really that's a good indicator. And very often the visions I see, the strategies I see, they're not empowering people to say no.
Yeah, in fact, I think I remember that same story. I think he also forced himself into to testing if you could build the habit of, I have a meeting, I have to put something in my diary. Can I force myself to take it out of my pocket, tap on this thing a couple of times and put it back away, for example? He might even have been part of the General Magic team, if I remember rightly, if we go back, which is a great example, a great video to watch on their Amazon Prime. iPhone was invented so long before iPhone.
Yeah, it's interesting. We can also talk about that. But what I find even more interesting is like there's this story that Steve Jobs was like totally in favor of the iPhone. He wasn't. You know why they created the iPhone? It's because they saw like, I think, a Nokia phone which had a sound MP3 player in it, and they were like, this can kill our entire iPod market. We need to do something. And they had to convince Steve Jobs, like, hey, we have to do something. This is going to eat our whole market. And then they did the iPhone, and they ate they cannibalized themselves, which is great.
I mean, I even heard one story that there were two teams working on the iPhone in parallel, seeing who could come up with the best idea inside Apple. I don't know if it's true. And the joke I heard was that when Steve on the very first version showed himself deleting a contact with a swipe or something, it was the person who was leading the second team. I don't know how true it is. I mean, it could be one of these urban myths, but it just sounds so possible.
Yeah, it sounds really cool.
Now, obviously, you get into the agile world quite a lot, Maarten. So I'm guessing there's also some other artifacts that flow out of the roadmap and link in. Could you kind of join those dots for us?
If you work with Scrum, which is the most popular agile framework, you have a product backlog. And that's basically a list of things you're going to be working on. And the main thing there is you need to keep it short because that's what I very often see is just like with the roadmap, it's a long list of things which basically should have you very worried. It's kind of like having a refrigerator with like 20 cartons of milk. They're going to spoil. You don't want that. And that's the main thing. It's kind of like you should have enough for a few sprints, and that's about it. And yeah, of course, there's a sprint goal, but that's something you create every sprint. It's not something you create ahead of time. And you have a product goal. But yeah, Scrum is pretty rigid about that because it basically says you have one product goal for the whole product, which doesn't make sense because you have got acquisition, you've got retention, you always got multiple things going on. And I understand for one team that they have one thing to focus on, but for a whole product, just one thing to focus on, I don't know, seems a bit too radical.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we need a roadmap goal as part of our kind of whatever this planning or iteration cycle is. If we're updating every month, every 3 months, should we have a goal, or does the product vision act as that equivalent? I wonder.
I don't know, what I always tended to do, and I'm curious to hear what you do, is every sprint review, I would pull out the roadmap and just show this is the current state. If nothing changes, if stuff takes longer, I think that's really important. And because you do it regularly, it also really shows the emergence, the uncertainty, because that's the main thing that people struggle with. Like very often it's used as an instrument to provide a false sense of certainty. And I think by regularly revisiting and regularly repeating over and over again that it's emergent and you figure it out as you go along, I think that helps a lot. And that's why I do it every sprint review, and it can be very short.
So for me, get every sprint review probably every day. There's somebody I'm talking to about it, because the one thing I've realized is I might be talking about it every day, but the people in front of me probably aren't in front of me every day. So they hear it at a much lower frequency. And so it feels to me like I'm a broken record, but for them, it's like, I haven't heard this for a month. I've suddenly seen what's changed. One of the things I'm quite a fan of is finding ways to make it more stable without taking away that reality of uncertainty. And one of the things I've often found there is changing what you put on the roadmap. Instead of putting on the features or the epics, maybe putting on the problems I'm solving. What do you like to put on your roadmap?
I'm a big fan of a now, next, later roadmap, and really focusing on for example, like you said, if you're doing discovery, really focusing on this is the problems we're solving, and then if you're working on it more on the solution level, like saying, hey, this is the feature we're building to achieve X or Y. And that's I think it's probably pretty similar to what you, because you already said, I think we follow a similar approach. That's my guess. And what I absolutely don't do is provide timelines for stuff we're not yet working on. You know what I mean? Like at most, like maybe the quarter, we intend to tackle it, but that's it. And if we're working on something right now, then I have no problems to say like, hey, we're working on this right now. We expect it to be done in July or 15th of July or whatever. That's cool, because you revisit it every 2 weeks and you just stress, hey, this is based on the current understanding. There will be surprises. That's the nature of the work. And that's what the conversation needs to be having. Like, hey, we don't know everything before starting. I call that the fog of beforehand. Before starting, you don't know everything. And if you try to fight that by doing more planning, congratulations. Now you have the fog of speculation. You're only making things worse. So that's very important.
I mean, there are things there's an interesting point there about planning and analysis getting there. There are domains where we can plan, where we can do it, and there are domains where we can't. Now, software tends to be not the great one, unless we have an absolutely clear deliverable. Like I've dealt with people in, say, I think it was the credit card market, and they have a clear cadence at certain dates. They've got to release certain network updates that are 2A standard. And frankly, you can plan to that. You can hit that date, and you can set that as a deadline because it's an external constraint. So I'm okay putting those on, even if I haven't done much work. I might have done a basic spike or something like that to say, is it even feasible? But yeah, I generally avoid the dates wherever possible.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So I agree with you. So I actually worked in e-commerce, right? So let's say you're rolling out a new payment method and you've already done it 9 times before. You probably can pretty reasonably predict how long it's going to take. There might still be surprises, right? But most of the time, and I think the other thing to keep in mind there as well is there's a difference between doing something new and polishing something you already have. Like if you've already built something and you're making small improvements, probably you can do that pretty predictably, you know what I mean? But the moment you're doing something completely new, let's say you're building a completely new notification center, that's a different ballgame. But if you're like adding a new notification to that notification center or a small something, that could be pretty predictable. So that's also something. It's a very good point you're making. It's not black and white.
And that's the thing. A lot of leadership has grown up in the past of a more manufacturing-oriented world where that planning, that mindset of analysis can get us to the answer. Like, heck, building a bridge or going into space, we've got to do the analysis to figure out how to do it. Yes, there's some iteration that Elon's gone through, for example, but all with known experiments to test to get certain results. And it was all about making sure that when they do finally really hit the button, it's going to happen, it's going to work, and it's guaranteed. And it's a planning process. Like, you build a bridge, you can go through a lot of best practice to figure out the stresses, the strains, all the rest of it. Now, when you dig into the ground, you might find a different substrate than you expected. So there's still some emergent stuff. In the city I grew up in, I remember there was famously a place where the river between the east and the west, and the local council decided they wanted to do a tunnel underneath the river. And they did it, and they tried, and it kept collapsing because it was just sand. And they actually knew it, but they kind of had this bravado, we'll make it work. What they should have done is done the analysis, really, and said, this doesn't work. Ultimately, they built a bridge because it made sense.
No, but I think you're absolutely right. And you were talking about Elon Musk. I mean, the way I always call it, every step we take shapes the way. Like, we're surrounded by this fog beforehand. We don't know everything before starting. Every step we take removes some of the fog. And let's be clear, right? Elon Musk also makes mistakes. It's not easy. A good example is the Model 3 factory, where they used the robots. Like, he wanted to automate everything. That was a big mistake because he realized that a lot of stuff that he wanted the robots to do, humans still were able to do better than the robots. So when he realized that, that's the moment he was able to ramp up the production for the Model 3. And I think that's the key learning here. Like, you need to really watch out, because if you believe you're smarter than you really are, you're going to do something like that instead of having every step you take shape the way. Try it out, see if it really is better. And it's really dangerous because we're so trained to predict and plan because we're smart. That's what brains do. They simulate, like predict and plan, instead of acknowledging, okay, I'm not that smart, or I might be wrong. Let's see what the evidence says. And that's very hard.
The analogy you used there earlier as well, fog, is one that Luke Herman uses in his Software Profit Streams book, of like the fog is in the landscape, and we navigate that landscape with tools and techniques like roadmaps, like sprint goals. You know, we go up high so we can take a vantage point. That's our vision, that's our strategy. We work out, we look at the map to say what problems might we encounter as we go along. Product's no different.
Correct. And the key thing to keep in mind, and this is a quote, but I don't know from who it is, the map is not the terrain.
And therefore we might find some of those unexpected emergent things as we start going through them. Like, if we're a Roman army, we might suddenly find a load of Teuton warriors in the middle of that forest.
There will be surprises, and then you have to deal with them. And that's the main thing we need to expect.
Do you have any preferred tools or ways of visualizing a roadmap in your world?
Kind of my philosophy is every step you take helps shape the way, right? So I don't start with tools. So usually what I tend to do is, most companies I join use Jira. It's just an unfortunate fact of life. Well, maybe it's a fortune. It's not that bad, actually. I hate Confluence more. Jira, I can deal with it as long as it's next-gen Jira. But the main thing is, in next-gen Jira, you can just make a Kanban board. And then you just make now, next, later with epics. And it's just very simple. It takes half an hour and you have something. And then you start using that. And then you discover, we need this or we need that. Can we... And then when you've went through that and you feel like it's not good enough, then you have adequate understanding to pick a tool. And that's the main thing I always try to tell people. Don't start with the tool. First start with like what you have and how far it takes you. And the moment you bump into that ceiling, kind of like the robots at Tesla, right? You notice the problems, then you know what you need for your context. Then you know what you need at your stage of the organization. And that's the main thing I always do, like start with something simple and not start with a tool.
In fact, I often start with Miro these days, or an old white or a traditional whiteboard if I'm in a room with people, or just good old PowerPoint. I know people malign it, but it's so flexible.
I have the feeling we use similar approaches.
Well, I like to think that's because that's what the best do.
Yeah, you're too modest, Phil.
What, in your view, is best practice in road mapping?
So I think the most important thing is start with humble plans. That's what I call it, humble plans. So acknowledge that your plans cannot take everything into account. And it's really important to, like you said, talk to your stakeholders, include them, and make them understand that the purpose of a roadmap is not to exude confidence, to have this glorious plan that looks magnificent and signals to everyone we know exactly what we're doing and when it's going to be done. Absolutely not. It's like you said, it's supposed to be a guide. I think that's really the best practice. Like the roadmap should make us feel a little bit uncomfortable and uncertain, because that's the reality. It is uncertain. There is this fog. And I think that's the number one thing you have to do. I think that's really a best. And the other thing, as we already talked about it, is it has to be emergent, because we're doing discovery, we're doing delivery, we're doing validation. Every step we take helps shape the way. So we discover, let's say we're working on something and we're discovering it's more valuable than we expected. So maybe we're going to be working on that longer. You know what I mean? Like we're going to improve it even more. And I think that's the crucial thing. There needs to be room for this learning and emergent. Those are the two, I think, best practices. And if you do that, then you're already like doing great compared to many companies I see.
So what we're saying though is we definitely don't kind of make it super, super pretty, invest tons of time in polishing the visual, then print it out on a plotter and stick it on the wall.
Yeah, absolutely not. But you said this is the one caveat, right? The reality is you need to meet the company where they are. And that's the challenge. Because if you're working at this big enterprise company where you have 10 teams with all component teams, you need to coordinate with 10 teams. What I'm saying is not going to work. You know what I mean? You need to probably have an ugly feature-based roadmap with all these dependencies, because your challenge will simply be getting anything out the door. You know what I mean? And you first should fix that. And I think that's the challenging part. You need to really realize what kind of company I'm in, what is the current situation. And the reality is where you want to be and where you are. If there's a big delta, you need to create a slipstream. You need to be a little bit ahead, but not too far, because otherwise there's no slipstream. And if you are too far ahead, you lose them. Like you're going to have dirty air, you're going to just disconnect everyone. And I think that's the balancing act you have to do. And I think that's really difficult to do well. And that's the challenging part. But don't start with a now, next, later roadmap like you and me kind of we're talking about with discovery, delivery, validation, when they're miles away from that. Because you're just going to alienate them. They're just going to think, what the hell are we doing? Does this person know what they're doing? So yeah.
In fact, I often even encourage, let's have a roadmap for our road mapping. It's like, how are we going to evolve? We are here. We want to be there. How are we going to get there?
I think that's a very good point, because then you can also really acknowledge, hey, this is the current situation. So we're going to really involve them, have sessions. What is a roadmap for? And gently get them out of their comfort zone.
So we've gone for the good practice. What about the bad practice or the anti-patterns?
There are so many anti-patterns that you see, like having a long list of features with all the timelines specified for 1 year in advance. And then the team starts working on it. And then after the first month, there's a delay. The whole roadmap, you're not going to deliver anything on time. I've seen this happen like at a company. In the whole year, everybody in the company is frustrated. Those are, I think, the clear anti-patterns. Like I absolutely hate Gantt chart roadmaps. Like I mean, I do understand they have their place. If your delivery is the main obstacle, it makes sense. If that's already challenging enough, you're happy to get anything out of the door. But please, that's not the majority of companies, I hope, at least.
I mean, so I've got a little thing, and we're trying to write some guides on them at the moment. I have 12 different road mapping visuals styles, and Gantt is one of them. And one of the things I like to say is, if your company has a Gantt chart, feature-based, date-based roadmap, and is delivering tons of value, it is working for you. Don't worry about changing it. But I doubt it is if that's your practice.
I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, probably they aren't. But I do want to stress, like I said, if you've got this huge coordination problem, that probably is the reason why you have this roadmap. It's a symptom of another problem, and that's the problem you need to fix. And if you go to the now, next, later roadmap, probably, minds will be blown and you won't deliver stuff because this problem hasn't been fixed.
What are your thoughts in terms of if you find yourself in that context? What are the biggest things that a team and organization could think about of how to break their way out of that kind of that madness, shall we say?
Team structure is incredibly difficult. Like, I think it's really important, if you have 10 teams that need to coordinate to deliver something, to reconsider your team structure. In an ideal world, you want to create as little distance as possible between the team and their ability to create and capture value. You want to minimize that, because inter-team collaboration is incredibly difficult. And the more teams, the more difficult it gets. And you should really reconsider, are we organized in an effective way? And that's what you should be talking about. And I really don't think that dependency management there is the solution there. Like, that's a duct tape solution. It doesn't work. And that's the main thing, the first thing you have to do. And I don't think there is a clear answer there of what you should be doing. You've got Team Topologies, which is a great book, which talks about different ways of team templates that you can use and how to organize the different teams. But that's what you should be tackling first, I believe. And then when you tackle that, then you can reconsider the roadmap, because otherwise, you're not solving the actual problem.
Yeah, I guess we're in the world of how do you scale Agile, and I think the philosophy I've fallen into is the best way to scale Agile is to descale the work, not to try and scale Agile. Unlike, shall we say, some of the more prominent methodologies at the moment that seem to go the other way of adding more overhead.
What I always say is, scale as you solve problems, don't scale to solve problems. And yeah, I think that's really crucial. And I actually studied life science technology. You start with a small reactor, you see that it works, and then you scale it up. and that's exactly what a lot of companies are not doing. Like, they're using a scaling framework, boom, bada bing, bada boom, everything's there. And then, okay, let's see if it works. No, that's not how it works.
Now, I know you have a concept of the planning cycle of madness. Could you kind of maybe unpack that for us and how that relates to a roadmap?
So basically, you've probably seen this happen at companies before. So what happens is management is unhappy, right? Because we haven't delivered our roadmap on time, everything's been later. So they tell the people in the teams, hey, step up. You've got to do a better job at planning. So what happens is big room planning. Everybody goes in meeting rooms for days and days, talking about what they will be doing, all the dependencies, over and over and over again. And then what happens is, the plans get injected with this false sense of certainty, this fog of speculation. And then surprises happen. And then we're anchored in plans, that slow us down and prevent collaboration. And then congratulations, everything's delayed, management is unhappy again. And then the whole cycle repeats. And I've actually seen this happen 10 times over again at enterprise companies. Like, the whip, you need to do a better job planning. And it's just incredibly frustrating.
Totally. Been working with a large enterprise company recently where the request is we need to improve predictability. And the assumption is more planning.
So what I always say is, the more we prevent to suck at predicting, the more we'll guarantee to suck at adapting.
So Maarten, whose advice on road mapping do you listen to?
So I really like Jana Bastow. Like I think she has very similar opinions on planning and road mapping. I really like the Now Next Later roadmap she invented. I use it a lot. I really like Pavel Hurin because he just writes a lot about all these different facets, that also road mapping, but also vision and strategy. I think those are great people to follow.
If you had to distill your philosophy on road mapping into 1 or 2 sentences, what would it be?
Start with humble plans. Every step you take shapes the way. Go where there's no path and leave a trail.
Maarten, been an absolute pleasure having you here today. Always like to give people a chance towards the end of the session to just give their pitch, how they can get in touch, where they can find you, and how you can help. Fire away.
You can find me on LinkedIn. Send me a message if you want to ask me a question, or send me an email. I've got a website. You can find it when you see me on LinkedIn. And I've written a book on sprint goals. So if you like what we talked about, my book is basically about that. How do you handle uncertainty by leveraging goals?
Been a pleasure having you here today, Maarten. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, too.